Somebody lied to you. And the worst part? They didn't even know they were lying. Every single fall, millions of gardeners across this country do the exact same thing. They pull up their plants, they pack away their ML. But here's what's going to bother you for the rest of this video. That rule was never real. It was never based on science. It was never based on nature. It was based on one thing and one thing only. What was convenient for an industry that needed you to stop growing your own food and start buying theirs? And today, I'm going to show you exactly how that happened, who knew the truth all along, and what you can do about it starting right now. Welcome to Evergreen Garden Life. Please like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment right now telling me what time you are watching this. I read every single one. Let's go back. Way back. Not 10 years. Not 50 years. We're going back to a time when nobody in America was buying spinach in a plastic clamshell from a grocery store. Because grocery stores didn't exist yet. And neither did refrigerated trucks, or industrial farms in places like California shipping produce across 1,500 miles just to reach your kitchen table. Back then, in the 1700s, 1800s, people grew food because they had no other choice. There was no backup plan. There was no app you could open at 9 o'clock at night and have dinner delivered to your door. You grew it, you harvested it, or your family went without. Simple as that. And what most people don't realize, what the history books kind of glossed over and moved past without giving it the attention it deserved, is that some of the most extraordinary winter-growing knowledge in this entire country came from Black American communities. Specifically, from enslaved people and freedmen in the American South who tended kitchen gardens under some of the harshest, most restricted conditions imaginable, and still managed to pull food from the earth in the dead of winter. Think about that for a second. Really sit with it. These were people who were denied resources, denied land rights, denied almost everything that a person needs to build a life. And yet they figured out how to keep food coming out of the ground 12 months a year. Collard greens, kale, garlic, scallions. They weren't growing these things because it was trendy or because some YouTube channel told them to. They were growing them because those crops were the difference between eating and not eating when everything else was being withheld from them. And the knowledge they built around those crops, when to plant which varieties survived the cold, how to harvest so the plant grew back, how to read the frost and use it instead of fearing it, that knowledge was real. It was tested every single season. It was passed down mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor, generation to generation. It worked. And it kept working. But then something changed. Not overnight. It happened slowly, the way most important things change. Refrigerated trucks came along in the early 1900s. The interstate highway system got built out across the country. Large-scale commercial farming in places like California and Arizona scaled up to a level nobody had ever seen before. And suddenly, it became cheaper and more convenient for companies to ship vegetables across the country than it was for individual families to grow them in their own backyards. And when that shift happened, those same companies had absolutely no financial reason to teach you that winter growing was still possible. Because if you grow your own food, you don't buy theirs. So the advice stopped. The extension offices quietly wound down their winter gardening programs. The garden centers closed their doors in September and didn't bother reopening until March. And the knowledge, that deep, practical, generational knowledge that Black Southern families had been carrying for over 2 centuries, got quietly buried under one simple idea. Gardening is a warm weather activity. The season ends when the cold comes. Bare winter beds are just how it works. It wasn't a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a boardroom and made a deliberate plan to make people forget how to feed themselves in winter. It was just the ordinary math of how institutions move. Once the system shifted toward industrial food, everything shifted with it. The funding followed the profit. The advice followed the funding. And most gardeners, maybe including you up until right now, never had a reason to question whether the assumption was even true. Now listen, if this is already surprising you, and we are not even close to halfway through this video, just imagine what the people who are subscribed to this channel are getting every single week. Real history. Real knowledge. The kind of information that actually changes how you live. Don't be the person who watched this video, had the wake-up call, and then didn't subscribe because you got distracted and forgot to come back. You know how that goes. You always say you'll come back. Hit subscribe right now while you are thinking about it. One tap. That's all it takes. Let's talk about what believing this myth actually costs you. Because I think most people hear the phrase, you can grow food in winter, and they think, okay, interesting, cool, moving on. But they don't stop to actually calculate what they are losing every single year by accepting the myth without questioning it. Here is a real number for you. A single 4-foot row of evergreen hardy white scallions, a variety that has been growing in American gardens since before the Civil War, that black kitchen gardeners in Virginia were harvesting continuously without replanting, produces somewhere between 2 to 5 pounds of fresh scallions every single month. Every month. 12 months a year. At farmers' market prices, that one little strip of soil, roughly the size of a kitchen table, is worth $200 to $400 in fresh produce annually. From one crop. One row. Now multiply that across a small raised bed with a few more crops. Some collards. A couple of rows of kale. Fall-planted carrots sitting in the ground getting sweeter every cold week that passes. Spinach under a simple row cover. What you're looking at is a garden that produces real, nutritious food through every single month of the year. In most American growing zones. Without a greenhouse. Without expensive heating equipment. Without anything complicated at all. And then think about the other side of that equation. Every winter you spend buying grocery store produce instead of growing it, you are paying for vegetables that were harvested weeks before they got to you. That bag of spinach in your refrigerator right now? It was probably cut 10 to 14 days ago in California or Arizona. It was washed, packaged, loaded onto a refrigerated truck, driven across the country, unloaded at a distribution center, shipped to your local store, restocked on a shelf, and then finally purchased by you. By the time it gets to your plate, it has lost a meaningful portion of its nutritional value. And you paid a premium price for that experience. Winter-grown greens, greens pulled from a cold garden and eaten the same day they were cut, are a completely different food. And I don't mean that loosely. The cold actually increases nutrient density in many of these crops in measurable, documented ways. The frost does something inside the plant that no summer harvest can replicate. It converts stored starches into natural sugars as a survival mechanism. So you are not just getting fresher food. You are getting food that is genuinely better for you, at every level, than what has been traveling across the country to reach your refrigerator. And you have been going without it every winter because someone stopped finding it profitable to teach you otherwise. That is the real cost of the myth. It is not just inconvenient. It is nutritionally costly. It is financially costly. And for communities, especially Black American communities who have historically faced serious food insecurity, it represents the slow erosion of a form of food independence that their own ancestors worked incredibly hard to maintain. I want you to think about someone you know right now who has been paying too much for groceries this winter. We all know someone. Open that share button and send this video to them before you forget. And when you do, if you still haven't subscribed yourself, I genuinely don't know what you are waiting for. This channel is free. The information is free. The subscribe button is free. Use all three. Because what's coming next is the part that changes how you think about cold weather forever. And you are going to want to be here for everything that follows. Let's get into the part that most gardening channels either skip over or never properly explain. Because understanding the science behind this, understanding the why, is what makes all of this feel real instead of just hopeful. And once you get this, you will never look at a frosty garden the same way again. Here is the thing about cold hardy plants that nobody tells you clearly up front. They did not survive thousands of years of brutal winters by accident. They evolved for it. The reason crops like kale, collards, parsnips, carrots, and spinach can stand in frozen ground and still be harvestable is not just because they are tough. It is because they have developed an active biological defense mechanism against cold temperatures. And that defense mechanism is the exact same thing that makes them taste dramatically better in winter than they ever do in summer. When temperatures start dropping below freezing, cold hardy plants begin doing something remarkable inside their cells. They start converting the starches they built up and stored during the growing season into simple sugars, glucose, fructose, sucrose. And they do this for one very specific reason. Sugar has a lower freezing point than starch. So by flooding their own cells with natural sugar, the plant is essentially producing its own antifreeze. It is protecting itself from ice crystal damage at the cellular level. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual biology of what is happening in the ground beneath a winter frost. Now here is where it gets directly useful for you as a grower. That same biological process, that flood of natural sugar that protects the plant from the cold, is also what completely transforms the flavor of the vegetable in your hand. A carrot left in the ground through December has a sugar content that can be 20 to 30% higher than the same carrot pulled in September from the exact same planting. 20 to 30%. You can taste that difference the moment you bite into it. A parsnip harvested after a hard freeze is so dramatically different in flavor from one pulled in October that experienced growers genuinely describe it as a different food entirely. Kale that has been through multiple frosts goes from slightly tough and bitter to tender and almost sweet, in a way that you simply cannot replicate with anything grown in July. There is no supplement for this. There is no trick you can do in a warm greenhouse that mimics what a real winter frost does to these plants. The only way to taste it is to leave them in the ground and let the cold do what it has been doing for thousands of years. And this is exactly what Black Southern kitchen gardeners understood intuitively for generations. You do not rush the harvest. You let the cold work for you. You harvest collards after the frost, not before it. You dig parsnips in January, not October. You pull kale after it has been hit by several hard freezes, and you eat something that the grocery store has genuinely never been able to put on a shelf, because the flavor fades almost immediately once the plant leaves the cold ground and warms up in transit. What you get from a commercial store and what you get from your own winter garden are not the same thing. They share a name. That is where the similarities end. The cold also does something else that makes winter growing significantly easier than summer growing in one very important way. It eliminates almost every single pest and disease pressure that makes warm weather gardening exhausting. The aphids are gone. The caterpillars are gone. The fungal issues that plague summer crops in humid climates gone. A winter garden essentially takes care of itself once it is established. You plant. You protect if your zone requires it. You harvest. That's it. The cold handles the rest. And for anyone who has spent a summer battling insects and rot and blight, that alone is worth the transition to winter growing. Now zones. I know that is what you are thinking about right now. And I want to address it directly because it is the number one reason people talk themselves out of trying this. If you are in zone 6 or warmer, and that covers an enormous portion of the American South, including Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the Carolinas, Louisiana, and Texas, you can grow most of these crops with zero protection at all. Nothing. Just plant in the ground and harvest as you go. If you are in zones 4 or 5, a single layer of row cover, the kind you can buy at any garden supply store for a few dollars, adds enough insulation to extend your growing window significantly and protect your crops through most of winter. And if you are in zone 3 or below, a simple cold frame made from 4 pieces of scrap wood and an old window turns your frozen garden into a productive growing space, even in the harshest conditions most people in this country will ever face. The barrier is not your climate. The barrier has always been the assumption that your climate disqualifies you. And now you know that assumption was never based on reality. We are past the halfway point of this video, and I hope you can feel how different this is from anything else you have seen on winter gardening. This is not a generic tips list. This is history. This is science. This is real knowledge that was carefully held by communities who needed it to survive, and then quietly pushed aside by a system that needed you to buy instead of grow. If this channel is not in your subscriptions yet, you are going to scroll right past the next video we post and never know what you missed. Subscribe right now. Turn the notifications on. And stay with me because the next part is where I hand you the actual plan, the specific crops, the specific varieties, and the exact steps to start. Alright. Here is where we stop talking about the problem and start putting the solution directly in your hands. And before we go into the crops, I want to be clear about one thing. You do not need a lot of space. You do not need expensive equipment. You do not need to have been gardening for years. What the women who fed families through brutal New Orleans winters in the 1800s had was not a fancy setup. They had knowledge. And right now, in this video, You are getting that same knowledge. Let's start with the single easiest crop on this entire list. The one that requires the least from you and gives back the most, consistently, month after month, year after year. Scallions. Specifically, a variety called Evergreen Hardy White. This is the exact variety that gardeners at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello in Virginia recorded growing continuously for 3 full years without a single replanting. It was cut dozens of times. It grew back every single time. Through Virginia winters, through summer heat, through drought and rain. No replanting. No special care. Just the ongoing harvest. Evergreen Hardy White survives temperatures down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit in open ground with no cover at all. A 4-foot row produces fresh scallions every single month of the year in zones 4 through 8. You plant it once. You harvest it for years. That is not marketing language. That is what this plant does when you put it in the ground and leave it alone. Plant it this fall and you will be cutting scallions from that same row next February, the following August, and the February after that. If you grow nothing else from this video, grow this. Next, plant collards. And I want to give collards the recognition they deserve here because this crop carries a cultural and historical weight that goes far beyond the garden bed. Collard greens were the backbone of black kitchen gardens across the American South for generations. They were grown under conditions that would have stopped almost any other crop entirely. Limited resources, poor soil, minimal tools, maximum pressure. And they kept families fed when everything else had been taken away or withheld. That history is real. And the plant that carries it is genuinely extraordinary. Blue Max, Winter, and Morris Heading are the varieties you want for cold weather growing. They survive down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit with no protection. A single established plant produces 1 to 2 pounds of harvestable leaves per month through winter. You harvest the lower leaves and the plant keeps growing upward, continuously without stopping. No spraying required. Collards are among the most disease-resistant greens in cultivation. And here is a number that should permanently change how you think about this plant. The calcium content in 1 cup of cooked collards exceeds that of a full cup of whole milk. This is not a side dish. This is serious, nutritious, cold weather food. Now let's talk about kale because kale gets a lot of attention during warm growing seasons, but almost nobody talks about what it actually becomes in the cold. The varieties to focus on for winter growing are Vates and Winterbore. These survive outdoor temperatures down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. Not 0. -5. Standing in open ground. No cover required. And what happens to these plants at those temperatures is that exact frost sweetening process we broke down earlier. The bitterness fades completely. The texture softens. The flavor becomes something that no warm season kale will ever be able to match, no matter how it is cooked or prepared. Plant by the first week of September, and you will be harvesting through February. One established plant gives you 1 to 3 pounds of harvestable leaves per month. Cut and come again, all season long, without replanting. For your root vegetables, start with carrots. And here is the critical piece of timing that most people get wrong. You want to plant a fall bed in August. Not October, not September, August. You need the roots to develop fully before the hard freeze arrives. And then, this is the part that goes against everything your instincts tell you. You leave them in the ground. Do not dig them up in October. Do not get impatient when the tops start to look ragged from frost. The longer those roots sit in cold ground, the sweeter they become. Protect the bed with a layer of straw mulch or a simple row cover once temperatures drop consistently below freezing. And then harvest through the winter as you need them. A 10-foot bed gives you 10 to 20 pounds of roots that are sweeter, fresher, and more flavorful than anything a supermarket has ever stocked. And if you want to add something truly remarkable to your winter garden, something that grows where almost nothing else will and asks almost nothing in return, plant Claytonia, also known as miner's lettuce. This is the green that saved gold rush miners from scurvy in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California in 1848. It grows in low light conditions that would cause other greens to go limp and pale. It survives down to 0 degrees with no cover. It self-seeds so readily that a single initial planting can maintain a growing colony in a cold frame for years with 0 intervention. The leaves are mild, slightly succulent, and meaningfully rich in vitamin C. And it grows in containers as shallow as 6 inches, which means even if all you have is a balcony, you can grow this crop right now. Here is the timeline you need to follow starting today. If it is still late summer or early fall in your area, plant immediately. Scallions, collards, kale, and claytonia can all go in the ground right now in most growing zones. Carrots need to go in a little earlier, so if you have missed that window for this year, mark your calendar for next August and do not let it slip by. If temperatures in your area are already consistently cold, you have not missed everything. Scallions and claytonia can still go into a cold frame or a deep container right now and produce through the winter season. Row covers are available at any garden supply store and cost very little. A basic cold frame can be built from 4 pieces of scrap wood and an old window you find for free. The investment is genuinely minimal. The return is months of fresh food. And for anyone growing in the American South, in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, the Carolinas, Texas, you are sitting in some of the most historically productive winter gardening territory in this entire country. The communities that came before you grew food through every single month of the year on this exact soil. Your climate is more forgiving for winter growing than almost anywhere else in the nation. The only thing standing between you and a year-round harvest right now is the belief that the season is over. And now you know that belief was never true. Before we close out, let me be straightforward with you for a second. If you have watched this far and you are still not subscribed, I want you to sit with that for a moment. You just spent the last 20 minutes learning something that most people will go their entire lives without knowing. History that was hidden in plain sight. Science that changes how you see cold weather. Real crop names and real timelines you can use starting today. And the one thing being asked of you in return, one free tap on a subscribe button. You are still hesitating on. That is the gardening equivalent of standing in front of a bed full of sweet winter carrots and deciding to leave them in the ground for someone else to find. Don't do that. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs it right now. And drop a comment below telling me what zone you are in and which crop you are planting first. I want to know. Here is what I want you to carry with you after this video ends. The knowledge did not disappear. It was never burned. Nobody took it out of the history books. It just stopped being promoted. It stopped being profitable to teach. And in the silence that followed, entire generations of gardeners came of age believing that winter beds are supposed to be empty, that frost is the enemy, that when the cold arrives, the season is simply over. But the women who fed families through brutal Mississippi winters in the 1800s never believed that. The black kitchen gardeners who kept collards and kale and scallions growing under some of the harshest conditions in American history never believed that. A farmer in coastal Maine who has been pulling fresh greens from frozen ground every single February for over 50 years never believed that. And starting today, neither should you. Pick one crop from everything we covered. Just one. If you are in zone 6 or warmer, start with collards and scallions planted by September 15th. That one decision will have you pulling fresh food from your garden in January, while everyone around you is at the store paying premium prices for produce that has been sitting in a refrigerated truck since before Christmas. If you are in zone 4 or 5, add kale and claytonia under a single layer of row cover. The investment is 1 afternoon and 1 packet of seed per crop. Within 2 winters, not 10 years, not 5 growing seasons, 2 winters, you will be harvesting fresh food from your garden in February. That is not exceptional. That is simply what happens when you plant cold hardy crops in the right window with the knowledge that your ancestors carried, and the system quietly buried. The nursery did not lie to you about your climate. They just never mentioned what else grows there. And these crops have been feeding families through harsh winters for 2,000 years and more. They were feeding people when there were no grocery stores. No refrigerati trucks. No industrial food system to fall back on. They fed communities through Reconstruction, through the Great Migration, through every brutal winter that came before and after. They are not waiting for better conditions. They are ready for exactly the conditions you have. Right now. Today. If you made it all the way to the end of this video and you are still not subscribed, I genuinely want you to think about what that means. You came here searching for something. And this channel gave you history, science, real variety names, a practical planting timeline, and the full story of where this knowledge came from and why it matters. And the one thing being asked of you is a single free click that makes sure you never miss another video like this one. This channel is going to keep posting content exactly like this. Real knowledge, real crops, real history, real results. If you are not subscribed, you will miss it. And unlike a frost-sweetened carrot that just needs more time in the ground to reach its full potential, a missed video is gone. It does not come back. Don't let that be you. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it. And I will see you in the next one.